Hi there and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Text. My name is Richard, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing the United States civil rights movement and using examples from my teaching to really delve into some of the issues that students have when they engage with this topic, and use some of the examples that I've used to actually support students in overcoming some of the sort of barriers and blocks that they have to getting a sort of deeper understanding of this very important but also very commonly taught part of modern American history. And as part of that, I'm going to be talking about how I've used this book here, The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward E. Baptist, that came out back in 2014. The reason I use this in my teaching, as I said before, is the fact that when you are teaching United States civil rights, what you'll tend to find is that often students struggle to really understand the deep nature of segregation and the impact of centuries of slavery and segregation within American society, and the impact that that had all the way through into the 20th century. One of the reasons this is because students come often to, when they come to this, I say civil rights issue, often with very limited contextual knowledge, and they tend to see the movement sort of dropped, if you like, into the broader kind of American historical narrative. And how I use this book here to kind of deepen students' historical knowledge was in terms of from pages 67 to 83 are particularly useful, where Baptist looks at the expansion of the United States in terms of the 1812 war with Britain, the kind of opportunism of the United States government at that time in the Revolutionary War period with France, to take, for example, New Orleans as well. And in this, again, Baptist, and this is why I use it in my teaching, it explains it really well in terms of how it's an opportunity to, and seen at the time as an opportunity to expand plantation-based slavery and that kind of slave-based economy across the southern United States. And it really comes through well in the book, and I've used it in my teaching because, again, he uses data charts and graphs to show the development of slavery through the 1810s and 20s and 30s up to and including the United States Civil War. So this was really useful for me to engage students with far greater detailed contextual knowledge of the development of the United States and also the United States economy at that time, and placing it as well within a global and certainly an Atlantic world context that often students struggle to fully comprehend. Because again, even when they're coming at the United States civil rights movement, and as a teacher you're trying to get them to understand how the slavery was very much within the fabric of American society and within its economy, and how that fitted into, in the 1800s, the broader networks of trade and European imperialism within the Atlantic world, and how you can link that eventually into the 1940s, 50s and 60s to sort of trace, if you like, the segregation and sort of racist attitudes and the kind of solidifying of that position of African Americans in American society. And the book is really useful for me when I did that, and really helped students to engage with some of the data, some of the primary sources from, for example, Louisiana archives. So really, really good in the classroom to get them to use primary sources as well, and also then to corroborate that with what, in terms of the secondary source, with Baptist's own book here, and what he is trying to put, the narrative he's trying to put across, and the contextual knowledge he's trying to give, and the contextual narrative as well. You can really bring that into your classes, and I found it really useful for when then subsequently I went on to teach the United States civil rights movement. Students had a better understanding of that, that legacy of slavery, if you like. And how did I know that? Well, I knew it in a sense of, in a very basic way, in just Q&A. getting students to actually, when we looked at 1940s and 50s kind of legislation, for example, a bit further back, we looked at Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. We're looking at kind of at the end in terms of separate but equal is constitutional, how and why we get to this, and sort of tracing from the late 19th century, tracing back how this this sort of narrative, if you like, or how this situation occurred, how it developed over time. So not that it was necessarily inevitable, but how that chronology developed and how this system grew and how it it embedded itself within the United States economy. And again, using parts of Baptist's book is really, really useful. As I said, he presents a lot of primary source material in the book, which is really, really useful. Another part that I use as well, slightly moving on, sort of pages 84 up to 110, is when he looks more closely at New Orleans. And I used it in my own teaching as well, because again, it uses quite a lot of primary evidence at the time. So you've got, for example, pamphlets that were produced at the time. You've got records from the actual slave markets and slave sellers themselves, but also from those enslaved people as well. So that's another important part of when you're teaching this period, that you get that sort of historical agency of those who are actually enslaved. And he traces a few of those accounts from the boats coming in through the market and into the plantations. So in my teaching, that's something you could use in yours, I think is a really useful tool for students to kind of latch on to a kind of personalized account and a personalized journey through off the kind of the Middle Passage to a certain extent, coming through New Orleans, the slave market experience, onto plantation and onto plantation life. So really getting it from the sort of the enslaved person's perspective, which is really important. So again, I've used that part in my book to look at New Orleans, its growth as an economic kind of powerhouse within the slave economy, and how that acted as a kind of entry point for tens of thousands of enslaved peoples through the 19th century, and how that then drove the growth of the slave economy, the growth of the cotton as well. And I've used that in another way to then link that back into industrialization and the growth of industrialization in Britain and Western Europe, and linking that as well into my teaching of empire at that time as well, which again helps to give students to sort of situate what is happening in America, not in isolation, but within the broader, as I said before, the Atlantic world, and more broadly kind of sort of imperialism at that time, which is very important even when you're going into the 20th century to look at the United States civil rights movement, to really provide some detailed contextual knowledge for students, so they can see, so it's not a kind of a bit of a jolt or jarring in a sense of why suddenly African American people campaigning for civil rights at that time. So it can come across as quite episodic for students, and they struggle sometimes to kind of see the longer history of why we got to this point by the 1940s and 1950s, and it's not in Martin Luther King is not in isolation, as though African American people haven't protested or been active in resisting segregation in the Jim Crow South previous to that. So it's a very important way, I think, and as I've used in my own teaching, to give students that deeper sense of history over a longer period of time, so they can appreciate, I think, more clearly the issues that are going on within the United States civil rights in the 50s and the 60s. So I think to sum up, I would, as I said before, this is a very useful book, and one that I've used in my own teaching to really give students a clear, primary, evidentially based account and narrative of the expansion of slavery in the southern United States in the early to mid part of the 19th century, and really enables students to, I think, gain a really good appreciation for how this segregation becomes embedded and becomes kind of, in a sense, naturalized in a way within not just America's economy, but also its political economy. And to a certain extent, I think, which is a nice sort of segue into the 20th century and the civil rights movement, its moral economy as well, and the justification that I look at in my own teaching at the time, look at the justification for segregation, and the kind of the white Southern response in the mid 20th century to attempts at further integration as well. So when I do that, I often find that the previous historical context and narrative that we've looked at, and I've used part of Baptist's book to do that, really is a really good kind of foundation of which students can draw upon to give them that deeper contextual narrative and analysis. So I think very useful, and something I continue to use and develop in my own teaching as well, so students have that real breadth of context when they come to look at a more detailed, shorter time period, as they do with the United States civil rights. So thanks once again for listening. I hope you had found some useful ideas. There'll be more to come in the near future. So thanks once again for listening. That's all from me today. Thank you. Bye-bye.